My testimony is a tragic one, that I'm sure a lot of you can relate.
But I want to share it with you so I can encourage you and motivate you. So I grew up in a broken household. My parents had me out of wedlock. Mom and dad both were drug addicts. The drugs, I don't know which, I believe it was cocaine and other things. And the various other minute things like alcohol and cigarettes and the promiscuous life. And their life was very ambiguous, it was corrupt, and it wasn't for a kid, it wasn't for a child. So eventually what happened is that my mother's side threatened him with the restraining order, and eventually he just gave up because he didn't want that to be against him. So my mother got full custody over me and tried to take care of me. This started a series of apartment hopping. We first stayed with my grandparents, and then eventually kicked us out because they wanted her to be on her own and she wasn't paying rent. So they found her an apartment and they got her a place for us to stay. And eventually what this really led to was, again, apartment hopping. So we just went from apartment to apartment because she couldn't afford rent. Then she couldn't afford it because she was getting the money, working hard for the money, and then using it to put towards drugs, alcohol, whatever. And eventually CPS got involved, Child Protective Services. I guess they found out because the times that I did go to school in elementary school, this was from kindergarten to first grade, they noticed that, things were out of order. My nails are long, my hair was disheveled, I guess. I didn't shower all the time because she was rarely home. And I guess they just noticed that there was clear negligence on, the parents' side. So CPS got involved, my mother found out, and eventually she tried evading them by staying at some friends' places. Eventually what happened was that my mother was staying at a friend's house, one of her friends' homes, and I guess the police got involved. They knocked down the door, I believe. Again, this is, my memory is hazy, but I do remember being ripped from my mother that day, and I remember being taken from her, and it was hard. It was hard that even though at that moment I didn't know it, she was abusing me. I mean, not physically, but mentally she was, and to a degree physically, not like in like a beating sense, but just negligence, like I said before. And this started a court process. I don't know how long it lasted, maybe a year or so, to basically see who would gain guardianship over me, who would become my legal guardian from that point on. So my grandparents were the first candidates, but they deemed that they were too old. One of my uncles was a candidate, but then he had a history with minor drugs like marijuana. They eventually came to my other uncle, again leaving names out because I don't want any backlash to fall on them. It's all is forgiven, I don't care. But eventually I got to my last uncle, and he took care of me. He took me in for a year. He had a wife, my cousin, and during that time, he wasn't the greatest. I'll say that for least. He wasn't the greatest. I was physically abused, not in the sense where he was punching me or anything like that, but it was just strict and abnormal punishment and disciplining for no reason. For example, I'd go to use the bathroom, and if I left the seat up, I'd get belted. If I peed the bed, I'd get belted. If I misbehaved in school for the tiniest little thing, like, stepping out of line during school, I'd get belted. Things like that. Eventually what happened after a year had passed is that the court gave his family a decision to take full custody over me, but there was a catch. They wanted my mother to have an opportunity to still raise me, because if I get it, the court's full responsibility is to try to keep the families together. So they tried to give her an out by saying if she acted on good behavior for an extended period of time, I think it's a year, no matter if my uncle took full custody of me, if she behaved for a whole year, she could come in, swoop in, and take me. So all that time, that money, that emotional investment would be almost for nothing, because if she were to come in at any point and just behave just good enough, just the right amount, she could just take me. So he decided to put me up for adoption. And some terrible things happened there. I was only there for 2 months. I was 7 at the time, and I was physically abused there by another kid. I think it was like 11 or 12. I was only 7 at the time. He also molested me. And it was a rough time. It was a really dark time in my history, in my upbringing. And it was probably the loneliest I've ever felt, because basically I just thought my entire family abandoned me. Everyone abandoned me, no one wanted me. That was my experience growing up. My parents left me. My father was negligent. He was a weak man. He was a beta man at the time. My mother was weak, fragile, and was dependent on substances, again, like my father. And that was my experience growing up. That was my experience growing up as a kid. And then God swooped in. I remember my grandmother telling me before all this really got bad, before things got really serious, where we were apartment hopping and we were, before my mom really became negligent, she was saying, pray. At that time, I grew up Catholic. I grew up as a Roman Catholic. And she told me to pray the rosary, which I'm not knocking those who are Catholic, but I do know the word says not to consistently pray habitually over the same thing. We should pray from the heart, right? We should pray genuinely from the heart, pray to God. Not to the saints, but to Jesus. And I did that. Eventually, I actually, as a kid, I forgot the prayer. I forgot the rosary prayer. And I started praying from the heart. And I started asking, hey, God, please just bring my family together. Please give me a new family if possible. Help my mother. And that was what I'd pray. And eventually what happened is that by the time my time was up there, my aunt, the oldest of my aunts and uncles, who was living in New York at the time, she decided to adopt me. She didn't know all this was happening, or rather she did know, but she found out a little bit later, and she had to start the paperwork, and it took a long time to get the paperwork done. She started the paperwork and got me up to New York as soon as possible. And from the age of 8 till I went to college, I lived my life up in New York, but the damage was done at that point. And they had to do a lot of years of love and care, disciplining, and they raised me in the faith, and they showed me exactly what I needed. And my mom got married around when I was, I believe, like 9 or 10 years old, and she got married to a great man, and he showed me what it was to be a real man, to be a man of God, and raised me in the faith along with my mother. Part of the reason why I got into training, and I'm segueing into why I'm doing this now, is that I saw the damage that can be done when a father doesn't actively live into that role that he needs to be living into. A man of God, a person that leads his family, and when he's too weak, and when he's too dependent on things and people and substances, the byproduct is the family gets destroyed. Children get destroyed, and it's such a crucial role in the nuclear family. And I believe that my calling in life is to help men physically and mentally to grow, to become more masculine, to take charge, to be able to take the punches, to sacrifice for their family. And it starts within and without. It starts in the gym. It starts getting into your word. It starts with the discipline and doing it every single day and doing it for the sake of God and family and friends. So that's my testimony in a nutshell, and that's the reason why I got into this. So I hope that you're encouraged. I hope this motivates you. It might make you a little bit sad, but I hope the ending ties it all together so that you can feel truly blessed.